So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where the Dutch Empire is real. Now some of you may not know what the Dutch Empire is, and to that I say how dare you, because the Dutch Empire is a very important figure in my What If Civilization Started Over series, which has over 64 episodes to this point. But if you haven't watched that series, or if you're new around here, then that's completely okay, because this is an independent scenario. Now I won't be calling it the Dutch Empire throughout this whole video because it has some other names, like the Dutch, or more simply the Brown Team, or the Dutch Team. It has actually a lot of names, but I hope you guys get the point. If you guys do enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. All of the support is greatly appreciated as we're trying to get to 200,000 subscribers. We are around 13,000-ish away, so we are getting closer and closer to that sub goal, and once again, all of your support is very greatly appreciated. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump straight into today's scenario. So the Dutch Empire has just plopped itself onto our world map, much similar to how the old empire did the exact same thing in the previous video. New video idea, actually. What if we did a video where a bunch of Wixo countries all plopped onto the world map? That'd be kind of cool. But anyway, this thing is pretty big. It encompasses pretty much all of Germany, which leads many people to get it confused with Germany. It's not. It's actually in the Netherlands. Speaking of which, the Netherlands are fully under their control, as well as Belgium and Luxembourg. They have a good portion of northern France, northern Switzerland, a chunk out of Austria, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary. Also the UK, and as I forgot to color in, all of Iceland. So in the series, this thing also has a lot of overseas territories, such as in Bermuda, but here we're not going to really worry about that. We're only focusing in on its European portion, which, by the way, is completely surrounded by NATO countries. So we're going to go ahead and just, ignore NATO, it doesn't exist. And let's get straight into what the Dutch Empire is going to want to do. And I have a feeling the first thing they would want to do in this case, if they were to go like imperialists and not be completely pacifists, would be to invade Germany. Now, why would you want to invade Germany? Well, it's actually a pretty simple question to answer. It's divided into two pieces and extremely weak, which makes invading it very, very easy. And that's exactly what is accomplished by the Dutch Empire, who will then annex the rest of Germany into their, well, empire. So far, so good for the Dutch Empire. I mean, they really don't have any strong countries around them other than maybe the remainder of France, but even so, they're not even that strong. So I guess Italy would be their only challenger. Russia, of course, would be their main challenger. And then maybe like Spain and I guess Finland, Sweden? I don't know. They kind of just did the world a favor and got rid of a lot of the more powerful European powers. But that also means they hold the power of those European countries, making them very strong. So they're going to be taking on another country now, and they will be going after Switzerland next. Now you might have seen me just kind of hesitate there for a second, and that was because I was going to say they're also going after Austria, so let's go ahead and go over that. And yeah, that's not going to go too well either. So Austria and Switzerland are both ran on over by the Dutch Empire, and both countries find themselves being fully annexed into the country, making this thing look a lot bigger and also unfortunately a lot more familiar. So the world isn't going to just sit here and let this happen. Of course, the Dutch Empire at this point has taken on 3 countries and has fully annexed all 3 of those countries, which clearly states that this country is a hostile one. So with that knowledge in mind, there's going to be a few European powers who are going to be like, hey, we should probably do something to stop this. And luckily we have a lot of volunteers. The most prominent ones being France, who starts the whole thing, the remainder of the United Kingdom, Spain, and randomly Denmark. These 4 countries will come together in order to form a defensive pact aimed at stopping the Dutch Empire's expansion into any more of Western Europe. Notice how I said Western Europe. This thing doesn't really involve Eastern Europe. And when the Dutch Empire sees the formation of said alliance, they aren't really worried, and that's because they are just going to go after Slovenia instead. Now, going after Slovenia is an interesting decision because it doesn't really have much to offer, but it does have one thing to offer to the Dutch, and that is access to the Adriatic Sea, which is access to the Mediterranean Sea, which is also access to, well, the world, if you really think about it, but also easy access over to the Indian Ocean, to the Middle East. Basically, this is just a shortcut. So Slovenia will fall to the Dutch, and much like all of the other countries to this point, Slovenia will be fully annexed by the Dutch Empire. So the Brown Team is doing a lot of stuff here. They now have access to the Mediterranean Sea, which I already explained why that is useful, but they don't really show any signs of stopping their expansion anytime soon. Basically, if you're a Wixo fan, think of it as this. Think of it as if the Communist Pact didn't exist in Wixo, and there was a bunch of small, weak countries surrounding the Brown Team. We all know how the Brown Team is. and they're going to take advantage of that habit here. And once again, if you don't know what Wixo is, or if you're new around here, or if you've never watched the series, I highly recommend going to watch it. It is our longest series of all time, 64 episodes so far. That's a record for me. It's the series that I find my most passionate work in, and it's just a good series with a really good community, so I just recommend you guys getting into Wixo if you haven't already. There's like 9 mini movies that can get you caught up pretty quickly, so you don't have to watch each individual episode. But enough promotion of that, and let's start promoting Tuesday's video, which a lot of you haven't watched. Go watch it. I know that like a lot of people don't care about the non-content stuff. Like that video that I posted on Tuesday was just about my plan for the summer, but it still kind of has a lot to do with the channel. So I would recommend that if you like my content, then you go watch that video, because there's a lot of information about the content which I will be posting in the future in that video. So yeah, go watch the video if you haven't already. Anyway, back to this. The Dutch, what are they going to be doing next? Well, they are going to be going after Croatia. Now, what does Croatia have to offer? Well, much like Slovenia, coastline. And I'm not entirely sure about what the benefits of having the Slovenian and Croatian coastlines will do for the Dutch Empire, which at this point is becoming very non-Dutch very quickly. But hey, they're invading anyway, and much like everyone else to this point, Croatia will fall to the might of the Dutch. And here we will see something a little bit different happen. So the Dutch will take over pretty much all the important, or I guess more important areas of Croatia. Just realized I forgot to color in Corsica and the Spanish Isles. But they'll take the coastal areas of Croatia and they will make the rest, aka the panhandle over here, into a puppet state. Now, this is going to have some reactions from the world because, first of all, the Dutch Empire keeps invading these countries and they keep getting away with it, but also because they're becoming quite large and quite powerful. There will be a new bloc formed over here in the east that will be led by Russia. And Russia will be adding a few members into its new bloc that include Belarus, Serbia, and Hungary. So these nations now fall under Moscow's influence, but in return, they gain protection from the ever-growing Dutch Empire. So the brown team really is presenting itself as a threat to the world, and that is evident with all of these factions forming up. The brown team actually doesn't have any allies as of now, or do they? You see, when Russia created its new bloc, it highlighted an issue which a few countries have with, well, Russia. Ukraine, for example, is a nation which has endured a lot of troubles from Russia. Now, I'm going to take a quick break from the video just to throw you guys some information. I did a lot of studying of the Russian-Ukrainian war recently, and it's definitely really interesting. I studied a lot of the history of it, but also the more modern geopolitics of it. And with that, I can confidently say that in a situation such as this one, Ukraine would more than likely seek security guarantees from another nation, this time being the Dutch Empire. Now, their first option would definitely not be the Dutch Empire. In fact, I don't think they would even want this, but this would more than likely be a necessary means to secure the independence of Ukrainian sovereignty, because the West, being the blue team in this case, more than likely wouldn't accept them into their alliance, because then that risk a war with Russia, who isn't even the main enemy of the West at this point. It is now instead the Dutch. Another country that finds itself in a similar situation to Ukraine is going to be Georgia. Very, very similar to Ukraine in real life. Russia has this kind of thought process as to which Ukraine is a part of Russia, and it's always been a part of Russia, even though historically speaking that isn't necessarily true. But it's also kind of similar with Georgia, just not as obsessive, I would want to say. So these two countries who have been victims of Russia throughout history, they will band together, this time not under the West, but under the Dutch. Also, Kosovo. Yeah, in a way, the Dutch don't even care about anything that's been happening because they are now setting their eyes on a new opponent. This opponent is going to be Slovakia. Yeah, I'm sure they'd be able to... Oh, okay. So Slovakia gets folded instantly. They have absolutely zero chance to do anything of any value, and they are next because of that. So even though these new factions have formed, we see that the Dutch are still expanding, and the brown team doesn't really seem to be too stoppable to this point. Or is it? Because when the brown team starts rolling into Poland, they are met not just with Polish tanks, but also Russian tanks who meet them halfway. This is not a reference to World War II. When this happens, there's a little bit of a standoff. Nobody really knows what to do, and the leaders of Russia and the Dutch Empire aren't too keen to sit down with each other because relations between the two have been rapidly deteriorating ever since the creation of the Brown Team's alliance with Ukraine and Georgia. So somebody makes a decision, and that decision looks something like this. Not good. In a surprising move, the Dutch Empire's tanks will not stop moving at Warsaw. In fact, they will continue moving into Russian territory, or I guess more specifically, Belarusian territory. You see, the brown team doesn't really like Russia. That's apparent not only in this scenario, but in the Wixos series. And the Dutch Empire will begin to rapidly invade the Russians and their allies, moving into Hungary and parts of Serbia, while also striving to invade the rest of Belarus, in which they almost do until they're met with Russian forces. At this point, Russian forces, which are already in Ukraine, are mobilized to fight back against this entire front, so this now looks something like this. Also, please don't ask me about how the alliances would work in this case with Ukraine, because I don't know. But Russia will activate their forces in Ukraine. They will also go down to Georgia and do the same thing in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Serbia will invade Kosovo, and we have ourselves a large-scale war between the East and the West. And it's honestly going really good. There's really not much going bad for the brown team, other than Ukraine getting invaded pretty harshly. Now, you see, Ukraine isn't receiving equipment from the West, being the blue team and the United States, because of fear of that equipment falling into the hands of the Dutch team, which would suck and would lead to probably the death of the blue team. So Ukraine is only getting help from its own allies, which isn't as good as its normal Western support from countries like the US and all of the EU, meaning that Russia's invasion of it this time around goes a lot better. Western equipment isn't there to slow down Russia, and they're able to do a lot of damage, unlike in real life. Additionally, Georgia being so far away from everyone else means that it's pretty much cut off and invaded. But the same thing can be said about Serbia, who is, unfortunately for it, no match for the Dutch Empire to this point, who is starting to become kind of like a mini European Union. Anyway, back over in Ukraine and Belarus, the front has begun to stabilize as Russian and Dutch forces clash up against each other in the Ukrainian fields. In Belarus, the Dutch operation is kind of starting to fail as the Russians push back the Dutch, recapturing Minsk, I think, somewhere around here. But at the same time in Ukraine, we see the Dutch forces continue to push back the Russians, now getting closer and closer towards Crimea. And if you know anything about Russia in real life, then you would know that the threat of Crimea falling back under the control of any other country but Russia is often met with nuclear response, which brings the question of what would nukes look like in this scenario, because Russia has a lot of nukes, and the brown team also probably has nukes, considering the fact that, one, that has nukes in the actual Wixos series, and two, that it has facilities in France and the UK, which probably have nukes, therefore it's under their control. And yeah, so for the sake of civilization in this scenario, we won't be going nuclear. So when brown team forces wrap around and enter into Crimea, the whole world is not blown up, and Russia is just very pissed off instead. They're taking all their anger out in Belarus, it appears, because this is the only area in which they find themselves winning. In Ukraine, we have the complete liberation of Crimea back under Ukrainian control, as agreed upon by the Soviets, disagreed upon by the modern Russian regime, and even more so disagreed upon is the liberation of Donetsk and Luhansk from Russian control. Donbass is back under Ukrainian, and then we just kind of see Kharkiv get liberated, and then all of a sudden Ukraine is fully Ukrainian again. Russia, not so happy about this, but they do now kind of understand that there is a trade-off here that can be won, one of which could actually help Russia out. So let's go ahead and take a look at what they decide to do. Alright, so in this peace treaty here, we have a few notable things happening. First of all, the brown team will be annexing all of Poland, and additionally, they will be gaining a new puppet state in Hungary. Now, as for Serbia, they are left alone, and so is Kosovo, who leaves the brown team's alliance. Speaking of that alliance, it is completely disbanded, actually. And as for Ukraine, they are forced to give up Crimea. However, Russia does leave the Donbass alone, and they completely recognize Ukraine's sovereignty, and in exchange, Ukraine will recognize the Crimea as a part of Russia. Georgia is fully annexed by Russian forces, and additionally, we see Ukraine finally get the security guarantees that it's been seeking since its existence. They get them from both the Dutch Empire and the United States, who kind of served as a mediator in these peace discussions. So that is how Europe has shaped out to this point. I actually probably missed something, but if so, I'll leave that to open interpretation from you. Now we have to get ourselves to this final event of the video. Now, if I really had to choose how I wanted to end this video in a realistic standpoint, then the Dutch Empire likely would have had to fall, and that would have happened via a blue team joining of the war between the Dutch and the Russians. So it would have been the Dutch Empire versus Russia in Western Europe, which would have led to it falling. But I decided that since it's the Dutch Empire's video, that we're not going to have them fall, and instead we're going to have them go out with a bang. And by go out, I don't mean that they're going to fall, I mean they're going to get bigger. The Dutch Empire will be declaring war on the Blue Alliance. Yeah, they're just straight up going for it. Like, you don't have to do that. they wouldn't have attacked you, but here we are. And the brown team, once again, is at a point where it doesn't have any allies outside of its puppet states. So this is a very tall task. However, I do want you all to notice something. The UK is without England. France is without northern France. España está tomando una siesta. And Denmark is Denmark. So when the borders are armed and Dutch troops start to advance, well, yeah, it's not going to go particularly well for the blue team who is on defense here. I mean, France surrenders, and oh no, France surrenders pretty quickly, which sucks for Spain. Corsica becomes free France, and that doesn't last long. And then the brown team will start to focus its forces not on Spain, but rather on the United Kingdom, going into Wales and taking it, then moving up into the remaining areas of England, and then invading into Scotland, who will happily sign a deal with the Dutch that makes them surrender. We'll see why in a second. And then Northern Ireland is like, hey, we're also going to do something very similar, and they also surrender over. So the UK loses. And also, by the way, don't forget the Dutch Empire has Iceland up here, and I'm sure they have a lot of navy up there. And I'm also sure that they probably would have invaded northern Scotland. But anyway, now it is the Dutch versus the Spanish. Have the Netherlands and Spain ever been to war before? It probably happened like a pre-World War I thing, like a medieval times, or during the times of the HRE, there's a lot of weird stuff happening, so maybe during then. But as far as I know, I don't remember if the Dutch and the Spanish have ever gone to war before. I'm sure they have because they're both really old. But whatever happened then probably isn't happen. I mean, I don't think the Dutch could have beat the Spanish. I'm assuming the Spanish won a war against the Dutch if they ever did fight a war. So I'm saying that the result of that war is not the same as the result of this war because the Dutch will be winning this one. Unless, of course, the Dutch won the one in real life, in which I look like an idiot. Spain falls. And yeah, it's time to take a look at a peace treaty where the Dutch Empire becomes Western Europe. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And as it turns out, not so great for the losers. So Denmark is fully annexed. We go over to England and we see that England is now Dutch, as well as Wales. Scotland and Northern Ireland both signed a deal with the Dutch Empire that said that they would stop fighting and resisting the Dutch if they were allowed to become independent in the case of Scotland, and in the case of Northern Ireland, become a part of Ireland. Both of those things have happened, and the brown team will recognize both Ireland's claims over Northern Ireland and Scotland's independence. Moving on down south here, if you're familiar with the Wixo series, you might find this kind of ironic, but France becomes a puppet of the brown team. The brown team also gains new access to the Mediterranean Sea via France, and they also gain control over all of Corsica. Spain, for the most part, is left alone other than a few economical outputs, which they now have to share with the Dutch. And that is going to conclude this scenario. So I'm hoping this is a little bit different than the normal Empire videos that I do, or scenario videos that I do, where the Empire always seems to win. Of course, that is the case here, but I also provided an alternate ending that I wanted to do, but also won't ever probably do, where the Empire loses. But yeah, that's going to do it for today's scenario. So like I said, if you guys do enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. All of the support is greatly appreciated as we're trying to get to 200,000 subscribers. This is a Thursday video, which might be the first of its kind. That's just because I messed up earlier in the week, had to push my upload schedule back. And don't worry, Saturday's video will still be a Wixo video, no changes there. So still going to be a Saturday video. I think that's all that I wanted to talk about. So yeah, once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. And of course, thank you to all our super fans. This includes CTG on YT, Geeksco, Euroball, Serminator, Augusto, King Cheese, A Norwegian, RS, Gail Martinez, Australian Geo Guy, America and Canada and UK, Zaylance, Lazo Does Nothing, Freezioi, Laser Taze, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Pablo Sigma Cat, Death Strider X, Hammer Toad 45, and DW Cool Dude. Once again, thank you guys.